The most important thing that we can do as caregivers, because we're rescuers, we're helpers, we dive right in, is that we hold that safe space. But most importantly, I'm going to talk about how you can protect your spirit as you're helping somebody. Because I did my Ph.D., my idea of what it was going to be to become a psychologist, because it's a minimum of 10 years, and then you do 1 to 2 years of internship. And I knew I wanted to work in the school system. I registered as a school psychologist and a counseling psychologist, so I help students reach their potential. And Julie, I appreciate the work that you do. I worked for over 5 years in the school boards as a school psychologist. But one of the hardest things for me is that nobody taught me how to protect myself. And now I have the opportunity to teach 500 students a semester, and half of those students are nurses, how to protect themselves from vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. And that life is a balance, and that we can be equal parts in pain and equal parts in power. And so often we think that we can only hold one thought or one emotion. And as I've listened over the past 2 days to all of you, the participants in the audience, the speakers, the panels, the richness of experience is incredible. And what I want to do today, as I do for my students, is to give you a framework to take some of those emotions and put it into a logical place so that you can still be connected to the people that you work with, your children, your students, your friends, but you can also be in a place of protection. Burnout is really high for, how many of you are in your 20s? Burnout is very high in early career, because as I was saying earlier, I had this idea of what being a psychologist was. Full disclosure, my mom's also a psychologist. And she worked in the school system. She eventually became a superintendent of the Catholic board here, and she used her psychology every day, and we actually worked in private practice at one point together. And one of the hardest things for my mom and I to do, because we care so much, is to tell people we don't want to hear your problems. How many of you can relate to that? Because you think you're being a bad person, and you do have the answers. Heather Chauvin has a podcast, and she talked about this recently. If we give too much time to people that want to tell you their problems in a moment, it will ruin your day, and it won't solve anything. So I want to talk today about how we can hear, but also allow them to go on to where they need to be. Because I'm going to say that if my mom, when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and when I was working in the school board as a psychologist, I was the chief psychologist. I was responsible for 50,000 students and a staff of 16. I had a Ph.D. I was supposed to know everything. I knew nothing. Today, I know nothing. I can say that today. Back then, I didn't realize I could say it. So people would come to me expecting solutions. They wanted to get rid, not, because they were bad teachers, but it was too much. They wanted to get kids out of the system, into a section class or whatever it was, and I thought I had to solve the problem. And all I listened to day after day after day as a psychologist was everything that was wrong. And I thought that was my job. And it absolutely broke me in two. And I took a stress leave from work, and at that time, that was about 17 years ago, people could not understand how a psychologist would need time to take care of their own mental health. And that story's bigger than this moment, but let me tell you, why we need the pain to get to the power is I would not have the full presence that I have today. I would not have the empathy, the compassion. I would not want to expand my heart the way I do if I hadn't been broken into. And I want to say to you, thank you, Gina. I want to say to you, I got through it, with therapy, which obviously it's good to take what you give. Everything I learned in life as to be a psychologist and a professor was not in school, it was in the school of life. And now that I have my credentials, thank God I had my credentials at the time, because if it were in the middle of school, I don't know if I would have finished. And now, I know know that the only thing I need to do, and the only thing you ever need to do, in everything that you do, is believe in the person right in front of you. I write this on the board. I post it on Instagram. I tell my students every day, and I back it with action. Because to this day, it's so hard to say, it's the first time I said it out loud, I don't want to hear your problems. You'll ruin my dinner, and nothing will be solved. Even in therapy, I'm going to talk about it in this talk, why neurologically, why we don't want to wire the brain for victimhood, we want to wire the brain for victor. I don't know if Krista is still here, who just came before me, but I'm going to add science to everything you talked about. Shout out to Krista and to Gina and to Jill, the speakers from this morning. What a wonderful foundation for me to come in. And speaking of which, through all of this, I've written 3 books, and I'm now I have my own psychology column in the Drive magazine. And I also brought a lot of the sort of alternative authors that got me through a lot of the challenges while I was broken into, so that I can expand myself for everybody. And so Carolyn Mace is one of my favorite authors, and I'll be giving this away today. And in fact, I go to her retreats on a regular basis, and I couldn't help but include a picture of her in here. She's a medical intuitive. Have you heard of her? Hay House is an incredible publisher. I know that Naviana, who's speaking after me, she's a big fan of Carolyn Mace. She essentially talks about how our biography becomes our biology. And that's why we need to reframe and take care of things. And then, who's heard of Wayne Dyer? Okay, so to go along with manifesting, another one of my favorite authors, Wayne Dyer, who happened to be a psychologist from Michigan. I'll tell you a little bit about how I ended up teaching. Psychologist from Michigan who became a professor, who became a writer. He's not alive anymore, but he's in my spirit all the time. And then Louise Hay. Has anybody heard of Louise Hay? Okay, so Louise Hay. So I have an affirmations book, and I have one of my psychology books, 2 different editions, and then I brought in copies of my most recent drives. Another technique, as we talk about problems versus solutions, I do want to hear your problems, but with a limit. I want to hear your strengths first. I want to be energized. I want to be lifted up. I want to take into a higher place. And then we'll get to work.